Modern country music, rock and roll, and R&B are the product of early 20th century hillbilly music and the blues. The central role of guitar in those early genres helped drive the instrument to unprecedented heights of popularity during the 20th and 21st centuries. But nearly a century before the first recordings of blues and hillbilly guitarists, the instrument already had seized the imaginations of American musicians. Sparked by the popularity of several Spanish and Italian virtuosos, a craze for the six-string Spanish guitar swept Europe in the 1810s and reached America around 1830. Over the course of the 19th century, the instrument became a key part of a new style of distinctly American music. By the turn of the 20th century, almost all elements were in place for the chain reaction that would propel guitar to a position as the dominant instrument for American popular music. Because it is so closely associated with rural blues and hillbilly music in popular imagination, the acoustic guitar is thought of as a fundamentally folk instrument. Antebellum guitarists, however, valued the instrument because of its ties to the refined musical heritage of Europe. In the 1830s, Americans still looked to London for the latest cultural fashion and eagerly adopted the English fad for guitar. Over time, the guitar shed its European accent and found its way into new types of uniquely American popular music. Far from being the rural styles typically associated with American roots music, these early manifestations of American popular music emerged in the cities, and the guitarists that contributed to the birth and growth typically were sophisticated urban musicians. Rural songsters and string band members, the types of musicians often associated with the history of the American guitar, largely ignored the instrument until about the turn of the 20th century. As early as the late 1840s, the guitar accompanied singing groups such as the Barker family, the Gibson family, and the most popular many vocal groups of the era, the Hutchinson family. According to Walt Whitman, these groups represented something original and beautiful in the way of American musical execution. While some guitarists diligently studied the instrument with teachers trained in European tradition, many others were content just to learn enough chords to accompany a simple popular song of the day. Typically, these musicians caught tunes. That is to say, they sang and played by ear and often improvised with a strummed or arpeggiated chord to accompany the song. Trained musicians questioned these unschooled guitarists, but 19th century guitarists' grounding in chords played a vital role in the evolution of modern American styles of music. Chord strumming guitarists were the foundation of what evolved into the rhythm section of the earliest jazz bands. The guitarist's backdrop of block chords provided a solid platform for improvisation by the front line of horns. The rhythm section concept was later adopted by country and rhythm and blues bands, and has remained the core of American popular music ensembles to the present day. Perhaps the most transformational event in American guitar technology during the 19th century was the widespread adoption of steel strings in the 1880s, followed in the 1890s by guitars built specifically to withstand the stress of high-tension strings. Steel strings versus gut strings were the subject of endless debate in banjo, mandolin, and guitar journals in the late 19th century. Writing in 1899, John Freon, the founder and editor of The Musical Trades, observed, "No section of the musical industry has shown greater development or more radical changes during the last few years than the business in small musical instruments and musical merchandise. Just a few years ago, the trade was entirely controlled by foreign manufacturers. In mandolins, guitars, and banjos, we already lead the world, and yet this industry is not more than 10 to 15 years old." The number of American musical instrument makers skyrocketed between 1880 and 1900. Musical instrument factories became larger and more efficiently organized, benefiting from economies of scale and employing the latest industrial technologies. The average value of musical instruments, other than pianos and organs, grew nearly 50% between 1880 and 1900. Illinois in particular saw enormous growth in musical instrument manufacturing. Going from only one company listed in 1880 to 27 in 1900, the state produced more than 40% of the total guitars, banjos, and mandolins made in America. This was the beginning of what would soon be the overwhelming dominance of Chicago in the production of guitars and other stringed instruments. By about 1890, as America cast off the stuffy Victorian producer mentality in favor of a more liberal and carefree consumer culture, a generation of middle-class guitar strummers emerged. These people had little or no commitment to mastering the instrument, but hardly thought twice about buying a cheap, mass-produced guitar for idle amusement or to impress friends. For this new crop of guitar amateur, it was sufficient to master a handful of chords in order to hammer out a simple chord progression to the latest popular hits. Companies such as Lion and Healy began to mass-produce tens of thousands of competitively priced pluck-string instruments annually. More serious guitarists were determined to raise the guitar to the same status as the piano and the violin, but they envisioned their hard work undermined by legions of bad players who, flailing away on cheap guitars, tainted the image of the instrument. Some makers of higher-end instruments seized on the craving of this segment of the market to elevate the image of the guitar, devising elaborate marketing strategies to appeal to elitist impulses. Guitar manufacturing powerhouse Lion and Healy used branding as a vehicle for segmenting the market. The more sophisticated and accomplished guitarists were targeted by testimonials from tuxedo-clad concert artists extolling the virtues of its higher-priced Washburn line, while the less demanding segments were sold inexpensive instruments under names such as Jupiter and Lakeside. A vastly expanded transportation infrastructure and new distribution centers enabled guitar makers to reach deep into remote corners of the nation. Railroads had connected major cities since the 1840s, but the rapid expansion of the railroad system in the later part of the century meant smaller cities and many small towns had ready access to factory-produced goods of all types, including musical instruments. Mail-order catalogs, especially those of Montgomery Ward, began selling guitars in the 1890s, making a wide range of instruments available to rural musicians. All the girls who had not already a piano were seized with a guitar fever, wrote a newspaper correspondent in the mid-1830s. Does anyone now sit down to enjoy the quiet of a summer evening? Alas, from one side comes the everlasting thrum of a piano, from the other, the twang of a guitar.